Glenn. Now we're going to take question and answer and comments and continue the discussion. But first I'm going to move this podium out of the way and stand off to the side there so people can see all the speakers. Sure. Does anyone have a comment or a question? Yes.
My name is Nellie Bailey, and I'm from New York City. I have worked for about 3 decades in Harlem, what used to be a historic African-American community, and believe me, it is no longer that. So if I may just make a couple of comments that will buttress the analysis of Dr. Monteiro as well as Glen Ford, and just a quick overview of what's happening in Harlem. And Black Harlem has always been Central Harlem, as opposed to East Harlem, which is El Barrio, as opposed to West Harlem, which was much more ethnically diverse. And what has happened there is exactly what Dr. Monteiro pointed out, the universities. And in this case, it is Columbia University, the 3rd largest landlord in New York City, that is following Trinity Church as well as NYU. And NYU's expansion has generated a movement in Lower Manhattan, which is almost comparable to that of Harlem. And in the case of Harlem, it is both race and class. The late Neil Smith, who wrote The Urban Frontier, The Revanchist City, is a great book. There's a chapter in that book on Harlem. And what he talks about is the banksters, or the capitalist class, plans for Harlem that has been in effect for about 30 years, and that is planned shrinkage to starve the community of essential services that they did for 2 or 3 decades. If I'm talking too long, I can that they did, pardon me?
Don't stall the browser.
Oh, that they did for about 2 or 3 decades, that is to deliberately withhold services. All of this was part of a plan that was okayed and supported by a number of administrations, mayoral administrations. And so what they did was to get Harlem on its last leg. No essential services. People would leave the city as they did, but a lot of Black people didn't have a place to stay, so they did. And so once they felt it was time to recapture the real estate, because by the time this process had ended and depleted itself, the city owned 60% of the housing stock in Central Harlem. Just imagine that. 60% of the housing stock, and they did it deliberately because it was a push out. They drove African Americans out. So they come back, they reinvest in the city. They reinvest in the city after redlining, because those African Americans who thought they were of the bourgeois class, they could not afford the real estate. And so Koch came up with an idea, you know what, it is this illusion that works so well. We're gonna let you have a building, a brownstone, for only $1. Well, the point is, you could have it for $1, but you had to have the capital to invest in the property. And if the banks were redlining Blacks who were applying for loans, then the dollar program became just smoke and mirrors, which is what it was. So here they are now, having driven out Black people. You have Columbia University in the Western Corridor, because it's very important to capture the main street, the commercial artery of Harlem, and that's 125th Street. And you do it with major corporations, and they are doing it fast and furious. But in the meantime, while you're doing that, you deplete services for Blacks. You close the hospitals, which is what they did with North General Hospital. You close post offices, because that's the center of life for poor and working class people. You don't have a bank account, you go there, you get your rent check, you meet folks. That is the banking system for working class people. And then of course you privatize education. And in order to do this, you have to have the complicity, the collaboration of the black elected officials. But it has rebounded on them, and the blowback has been fast and furious, because Central Harlem has lost 100,000 black residents. And now this district, this congressional district that was created under Adam Clayton Powell now no longer has an African American majority. So the politicians have really cut off their nose to spite their face, which is what we told them, because the new folks coming in are not going to vote for them at all, because there's a new bourgeois class that is coming up, which is not being responsive to them. But let me just quickly talk about the corporations that are moving in. You capture the main commercial artery. How do you do that? You bring in the major corporations. So in Harlem, the black businesses, you do it through rezoning, which is what Mayor Bloomberg is doing throughout New York City in minority neighborhoods. He has bragged that he has rezoned 1/5 of New York City, but it's a little bit more than that. So just give me 2 more minutes and I'll stop, okay? It's a little bit more than that. So they rezoned 125th Street to allow major developments up to 27 stories. Now you know what that means, right? So anyway, so they have these major new projects that are coming into Harlem. Let me just give you 4 examples so you can see what I'm talking about. At the corner of Lenox Avenue and 125th Street, there's a vacant lot. There's going to be a new commercial building, about 13 stories, anchor tenants, Whole Food, thank you Pam Africa, Burlington Industry, American Eagle Teenage Apparel. They are renting space at $160 a square foot. Now, what was considered expensive in Harlem was $70 a square foot. And how has this affected the most successful black businesses? Human Bookstore, the biggest black bookstore in the country. The rent went from $5,000 to $10,000 a month. The owner said, hey, listen, I'm not going to work just to pay rent. I'm out of here. The Lenox Lounge, historic jazz lounge, rent went from $10,000 to $20,000 a month. That's what they're doing. And so who can make it in this environment? Marcus Samuelson, who was the chef for President Obama, who President Obama, when he came to Harlem, had a $38,000 plate dinner. But we were out on the street protesting, as we did against his National Defense Authorization Act. Major tenants coming into 125th Street. You have Applebee's, you have Red Lobster, you name it. There's going to be, Bill Clinton moved downtown. He no longer needs Harlem. He was there, but that's passe. This is bigger than Bill Clinton. And so what's coming to Harlem now? There is a hotel that's coming. Over 200 rooms, a dining room that will serve up to 200 to 300 people, and luxury apartment buildings. Further down on 125th Street, just off Lenox Avenue, there's going to be another luxury development. And the price for the Negroes in Harlem is going to be the headquarters of the National Urban League. But and of course, a civil rights museum. A black civil rights museum. But in this new development, there will be luxury apartments. Jeff Kennedy, President Obama's man in Harlem, has a charter school on the grounds of Frederick Douglass Public Housing, K through 12, $500 million, most of it funded by the hedge funders from Wall Street, as they have financed the private school movement, Harlem being the Silicon Valley of charter schools. That's what is happening in Harlem, and I wanted to share this with you. I hope I wasn't too long, so that it illustrates in this historic African American community the points that were made by all of our speakers. And I thank you so much for this time.
Would anyone on the panel to address any of the issues she raised? Yes, sir.
I'd like to address more what my friend Glen said. It's clear that there are two ways the oppressors, I should say, can deal with the oppressed. One is what South Africa did during apartheid, where the whites kept close by but highly subjugated a huge black working class. The other is what the Zionists are trying to do in Palestine. That is where you evict all of the oppressed totally from the area, push them out completely. What cheap labor, what reserve army you get with migrants perhaps from the Philippines, Bangladesh, somewhere like that. As I understand it, what Glen argues is that the rulers in this country have adopted something more like Israel, less like South Africa. I'm not so sure about that. It's a discussion we'll have to continue to have. Certainly Glen makes a powerful case. I see that in Chicago, where I live, very clearly. The way it used to be is the Loop was here. That's the downtown financial business area. The young white college trendy, I don't know what the Philadelphia version of, like sort of Greenwich Village, white and young college yuppie entertainment. Lincoln Park. Lincoln Park was about there. And in between were large African-American housing projects, Cabrini Green, which you probably heard of, being the most important. That's all gone now, totally. And it's one straight upper income, virtually all white area, right the way from the downtown business area up to the Lincoln Park entertainment area. So there's clearly great validity in what Glen's saying. But here's what I think is happening. I think the rulers, the traditional manufacturing industrialists, realized they weren't getting profits in basic industry. So they looked around and said, where can we find a safe harbor in a storm? And they temporarily went into finance. But it isn't so much that the finances are strong, it's that the financials are the glove that industrial capital is wearing. And it's the money of industrial capital that enables finance to do what it's doing. And I think this is a temporary situation. I think once they've broken our unions, once they've driven wages down, then they will go back into basic industry at a lower rate. There's already a frightening indication of that. If you subtract transportation costs, wages in some parts of this country have sunken so low that it's cheaper for capitalists to return production from China or Vietnam and reopen production in this country. Wages have fallen so low. I think that's the profit and the long-term plan of capitalism is lower wages in this country. Then when wages are low, go back from finance, which is an unsecure, unstable, temporary waiting area for capital, move back into low wages and exploit everyone they can, including black workers, in that regard. So it's a discussion we'll continue to have.
Somebody else wants to respond.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think this is a very interesting discussion that has to go on.
Yes.
Because I don't think we can understand Glen's thesis without, which is also connected to the question of the color line and the dehumanization of the black proletariat, the complete drive to make invisible to society, generally to the world, the suffering of African Americans and the plight of African Americans, which the world had embraced as a human rights struggle and a signature of the injustice of the American capitalist system. I think we have to look at this problem of finance capital in the global context. And I think without going into a lot of detail, to really understand it, we cannot look at it in New York or Chicago or San Francisco banks. I think to fully understand what is going on, we have to look to Africa. Now, why do I say Africa? I think the attack upon Libya tells us more than just that they didn't like Gaddafi.
That's right.
I think what they disliked was what Gaddafi was proposing, and that is a new gold-based currency that would compete with the euro and the dollar, not only in Africa, but in trade between, like what Glen said, the South-South trade. This makes finance capital more desperate and hence more aggressive. I would just end on this. Hugo Chavez's government in Venezuela is proposing the same thing, that there cannot, outside of a few so-called emerging markets, the South cannot develop unless it begins to establish its own banking and currency institutions. And this is what, when we talk about finance capital, this is the source of reaction and war and of the counter-revolution that I contend the Obama administration represents. This is not just another reactionary or conservative administration. They represent all-out counter-revolution because they so accurately represent finance capital on a global scale, which means they have to defend neoliberal, but what neoliberal capitalism means is a defense of the hegemony and supremacy of the US dollar.
Let me comment. Of course, the United States will once again be a place for industrial capital, and of course, finance capital is deeply involved with industrial production elsewhere, and would become more involved here again if their management of the race to the bottom reduces us to a kind of living standard that we would accept those kinds of wages. But I think in many ways, finance capital becomes more and more disconnected from the real world economy. And I think the best evidence of that is in derivatives. Here we have 600 to 1,000 trillion dollars in notional value in derivatives in a world in which the gross planetary product is only about $90 trillion. Clearly, the whole planet can't leverage the kinds of bets that they're making, and that is a great disconnect. I think what I'm saying, what I'm trying to say, is that in many ways, those finance capitalists who purely play in money don't really feel a stake in the society at all, in terms of the unrest that unemployment may create, in terms of the rebellion that constant pressures on the urban black population might create. I don't think that they care about any of it, because they're dealing in this world of 600 to 1,000 trillion dollars in their money that nobody else can spend, nobody else can hold. And I also believe that that is the sure sign that their demise is imminent.
He was making an attempt to describe the individuals as rulers. I mean, I don't see no difference in these guys in Washington, Obama and the rest of them, than Al Capone, John Gotti, Carlos Gambino, you know what I mean? Because the gangsters, they act like gangsters. There's no such thing in America as the rule of law. None. And it's case after case that would demonstrate that. Now, if we want to do something and really get rid of these jokers, we got to, first of all, you got outlaws on the Supreme Court. You know, yes, sir. You got Clarence Thomas, Anthony Scalia. They take money from individuals, go rule on their case, and then they tell us we can't do anything about that. That is absolutely wrong. You know what I'm saying? The separation of powers. Holder could have sent Clarence Thomas to jail when they was ruling on Citizens United. He could have put a stop on it by investigating him and his wife. His wife gets $500,000 on a case that he ruled on in her favor. And he claims that he didn't disclose that. He claimed that he forgot. Or he didn't fill it out right. He didn't understand. I mean, how could we accept that? And we allow them to do that. We can stop it. I'm just saying, you know what I mean? To me, they're gangsters. If they can figure that up, with Obama, the whistleblowing law is non-existent. More people that went to jail trying to tell on folks since Obama been in than anybody else.
Yes, Andy.
This is first time I'll go.
I just wanted to say,
Stand up.
my name is Glen. I just wanted to say that it sounds like everybody agrees that the blacks in urban areas and other white poor urban areas are being pushed out and eventually pretty much left to die until it's time for the world capitalist system to come back to us full circle when some of us might not even be here anymore, especially black people. So I was wondering, maybe we can have the organizers, it'd be a good idea for all the organizers to get together, kind of like how China is doing with Africa, and they're meeting secretly without the European powers. Like, can we meet secretly with like our organizers to create something of our own nation where we can escape what's happening, where we can kind of exit ourselves from what they're doing? Because right now, I think Martin Luther King had, you in the burning house. You still in the house? I don't know what that Malcolm X, yeah, right now we're in the burning house, and we're saying we don't want to be in the burning house, but we're still in the flames. So I don't know, but I think people should organize, and the organizers need to meet from different cities. She mentioned New York, and somebody else mentioned Chicago. We're talking about Philadelphia, and I don't know where all the poor people, where are they supposed to go? What are they supposed to eat? How are they supposed to learn? I mean, somebody has to organize something, or everybody's going to suffer severely. Third world status. Meanwhile, you're looking over at big towers of, glorious stuff that you can't even work in, you can't learn in, you're not welcome at. I don't understand. It's frustrating. So the question is, can we make a group organized? So stay organized.
Mr. Response?
Why don't we continue the discussion then?
Okay, well, Andy and Chris, and then...
Well, just in terms of what the last speaker said, we definitely need all the ideas and activities that we can get out there in terms of ways to organize and things to organize for. Which leads to what I was going to say originally. I think one thing we must organize for is what Glen ended with, and I don't want to misphrase it, but I think it's a dissolution of the finance capital class. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's what I said. It probably is not the best phrase, but yeah.
No, I like the phrase. That's why I don't want to misquote you. And I really do think that we have to get out there and call for that, and that we can. I am active with the Labor Outreach Committee of Occupy Wall Street in New York, and know the brothers and sisters on various other committees of Occupy Wall Street in New York. And they're doing some righteous work, 26 hours a day, especially the ones out there dealing with Sandy. But they don't, most of them, have that conception of really literally occupying Wall Street and seizing the banks and taking the trillions, or what comes after trillions, because Glen's right about the derivatives, and using it for people's needs. They don't have the conception. Some of them explicitly counterpose a different conception, that we'll just run away from the banking system, we'll open credit unions, we'll open small people's banks, and let them go hang themselves. And it doesn't work that way. History shows it doesn't work that way. Speaking of history, and that brings me back to what Dr. Monteiro said, and I'm so glad you raised Black Reconstruction. And for the New Yorkers in the room, if you haven't heard it, there's a multi-part educational series going on now with the Breck Forum about that book, Black Reconstruction, which a friend of ours, son of ours, Tim, is leading. And the reason I raised that after saying what I did about seizing the banks is what you brought out about the mass strike of the Black proletariat, what that led to in terms of, I believe, Du Bois openly called it a dictatorship of the proletariat and how that was crushed. The point is that all of that happened on a mass scale, on a society-wide scale. It didn't happen by going off, as some occupiers say, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the New Yorkers, and you know, we'll do our own society. It doesn't work that way. You have to want to seize power on a nationwide, and these days on a global-wide scale. The other thing is, and for time's sake, I'll just say 2 sentences on it. This whole question of finance versus manufacturing versus other kinds of capital is crucial. I'm really glad we started a dialogue about that tonight, and we should stay in touch with each other about that.
Yeah, I actually wanted to just raise a concern I have about this idea that financial capital is in control, and it's not because I'm an economist and because I really have looked. I can't talk about this in an empirical way, but I know something about working class history. And in working class history, when people argued in the past, I'm not saying that's the case now, but here's my word, argued that there was a division between the interests of financial capital and manufacturing capital, the strategic outlook that flowed from that was to ally with manufacturing capital or some middle class layers or some against finance capital. And since we're all here because, I think we're all in this room because we're pretty sure that the Democratic Party, including the Black Democrats, are not an alliance that's productive. I'm wondering what you think the strategic implications are. The second and the related question is about this whole idea of the global South currency and trade organizations. I know a lot of people look to Chavez and give a lot of weight to ALBA and think about these kind of solutions on the African continent as well. And I'm skeptical about that. There is an alternative analysis that, in fact, the BRIC countries are functioning as sub-imperialists on the African continent. They're occupying Haiti. We can see economically the kind of extraction that's going on under those groups. And I'm skeptical that working people in the global South are actually going to see a material benefit of the type that a lot of people hope for through these alternative trade organizations. So I was hoping you could comment on, one, the strategy that you see flowing out of this idea that financial capital is somehow preeminent and has interests apart from manufacturing capital, and then the question of currency and trade organizations.